Waycrest Manor bosses are brutal, and it's especially brutal on Tyrannical whenever the bosses have more HP and deal more damage to your group. And so, whenever the top team in the world right now puts up a 29 Waycrest Manor, it's probably time to take a look and see what they're doing. As Kira, AJ, Insia, Grievoker, and Hearthjax were able to time on Tyrannical a 29 Waycrest Manor. They've all been streaming a decent amount this season so far. They were a part of Team Last Minute that got, I want to say, 5th place in the most recent TGP. They almost beat Echo during Cup C weekend, and this is a team of very skilled players just as a whole. And so we're going to take a look at some of the most important runs or most important moments in this Waycrest Manor run and kind of talk through some of the stuff that they did and what they're doing with this dungeon. First and foremost, I think that something that people probably are going to start adopting now is the pre-invis potion to Heartsbane Triad first route. And so I've seen a lot of people sometimes they'll lust like a trash pack in Waycrest Manor, and that can be okay on Fortified, but in general, Heartsbane Triad and Soulbound Goliath are probably the two biggest limiting factors of your ability to be able to time this key. And so immediately running to Heartsbane Triad with all offensive CDs available plus Lust on pull is going to probably be your best bet. And so that's what you're seeing from this group right here. So they literally just make their way straight to Triad. And now let's kind of talk about kicking Triad, because I've seen some people complain recently about getting melee to death on Heartsbane Triad, and it's actually it's easy to understand how it works. So you're going to be trying to kick the non-active mobs this season. So in BFA, you would actually try to kick the mob that was active because it does a tank bolt, and the tank bolt did a lot of damage in BFA. Now, tanks are a lot more powerful, and the tank bolt doesn't do as much damage relative to tanks' HP pulls. However, the secondary bolts, which whenever the mob is not holding the iris, so you see right here on Malady and Briar, have them circled, you're going to be trying to kick these off casts, and you do see the Evoker's already kicked one of them right here. And so you're going to be trying to kick these off casts. Now, a lot of people have experience getting melee to death, particularly things like Mystery War Monks and Havoc Demon Hunters, I think are the people who've probably complained the most, also like Holy Paladins and stuff like that. How threat works on this fight is the mobs are effectively immune to taking damage, but healing still generates healing threat. Even if mobs are immune to taking damage because they're not holding the iris, that doesn't mean that you're not generating healing threat on them. And so what I've seen from some players recommend to people is that you don't kick them until you have one pass through. Now, there is a different way that you avoid getting melee as like a Havoc Demon Hunter, like a Mystery Monk. First off, you just stay away. And you see Insia right here is just not standing on top of Briar. He's making sure that Malady is also close to Kira. Kira, as a prop paladin, is probably going to be generating a decent amount of healing threat on these mobs, but pretty early kicks are very dangerous in phase 1 before the tank has had the opportunity to actually go through. So making sure that you're not in melee range of the mobs who have yet to be activated is definitely the most consistent way of doing it from my experience. In addition to that, you can actually kind of hold your kicks. So phase 2 of this fight, whenever the runic marks, these unstable runic mark curses are coming out and you have the movement debuff, this is the hardest part of this fight in general. And so you can actually kind of save your kicks until now whenever you're kicking the off targets, and that actually reduces the amount of damage that's going out on the party by a large amount. And so I would recommend, especially if you have like a 20 to 30 second kick CD, say you have like a ranged kick, waiting until the second phase before you even kick the mobs. Tank positioning and how they're actually tanking this boss is correct for what they're looking to try to do. And once you go through the first round of kicks, it's mostly fine. But on pull, making sure that you're not getting meleeed is a pretty big deal. Making sure that you're popping major defenses for these unstable runic marks. You see Kira on this protection paladin is trying to heal, and he's pressing Blessing of Sacrifice on his group as much as possible. And he is playing the role of a healer. He's doing 45k HPS, AJ at 250k here. And Hearthjax is actually also somehow doing 40k HPS. I'm not 100% sure how that even happens. Now, once they're through the unstable runic marks, the fight gets a little bit easier. They have like the nettles. They're going to pop like immunities. The second time through, whenever they make it through Malady again and they get the unstable runic marks, that's another pretty large point of danger. But since you have Selena down, she's not casting on the group, and so players are less likely to die here. You see Kira with Sax AJ. They drop their barrier, they drop their darkness, they're popping all their externals. And so once you're through one time, it becomes a lot easier, is what I would say about that. Probably the hardest healing check in Mythic Plus right now. The hardest AoE healing check in Mythic Plus, rather. Hardest single target healing check in Mythic Plus is Soulbound Goliath. But to get there, they have to go through the courtyard area. You know, the courtyard, making sure that you have like ample kicks in the courtyard area for the Thorn Guards, making sure that you have the captains before you make it there, making sure that you have the captains locked down is pretty important. It's kind of annoying in this place on Raging. They do have the Evoker Overall Soothe, though, so that's something to kind of look out for. And so they're going to be pulling in the courtyard. They're going to probably pull some of the trash out of the Raw room. They're going to stall for their second Lust to come up. Because how Lust is set up in this dungeon is first Lust on Triad, second Lust on Soulbound Goliath, and you actually just pull the Raw trash until that 10-minute mark when your second Lust comes up. And that just makes the key a lot easier. And then historically, third Lust is going to be like on... It's going to be like on CD, and then fourth Lust, if you're getting one, is going to be on Gorak Tul. That's typically what the Lust structure has looked like in this key so far this season. Now, it might change at some point, but that's roughly what it's looked like. And so now let's talk about Soulbound Goliath. So they Lust this boss. Let me actually go back to the very beginning. So again, they're pulling until like all Lust and all their offensive CDs are up. They have Combustion, they have Breath of Eons, they have Metamorphosis available on pull. They pop their Lust, and they're going to be actually kind of delaying popping Breath of Eons and Metamorphosis for the first Soul Thorns. So this boss's main mechanic is Soul Thorns. Now there are other mechanics. Like I think that we're going to talk about the tank in a second, but the main mechanic on this boss is Soul Thorns. And there are, I don't want to say a lot, but there are a few good ways of getting out of Soul Thorns, especially for this group right here. First off, they have Blink. So ideally, they have every single one go on Hearthjax. So he's not talenting Shimmer, he's actually talenting Blink, and that way he's able to blink out of the stun and completely negate it. So their best case scenario looks like every single Soul Thorns goes on their mage. That is ideal. On top of that, they have the ability to be able to Metamorphosis, they have the ability to be able to Breath of Eons in advance, right? You have the pre-meta, you have the pre-Breath of Eons, the cast, and you hope it goes on you. And now, proactive gameplay of popping an immunity like this is not very good. The Blink reactively is quite good. There's also some other reactive measures that you can take. You can Human Racial, you can Blessing of Protection as well, if you have access to those things. On top of that, you can also play a Gladiator's Medallion, which you see sometimes where teams will send all three of their DPS players, and these are teams that typically play with an Augavoker. They'll send their DPS players outside of the instance to put on Gladiator's Medallion just for this boss. And what this allows you to do is to completely negate the stun reactively as opposed to proactively. And that's quite good. Waycrest Manor is a key that has a decent amount of leniency with the timer, and so sending your players out to put on that trinket, it's not bad. So first Soul Thorn here goes on Hearthjax. They pre-meta, pre-Breath of Eons it to make sure it doesn't go onto them because they want their offensive cooldowns with their Lust and stuff like that to be the most effective timing possible. And so then we're just going to be rotating things. Like we're going to pray that the Blink, we're going to pray that we get every single one on the Mage. If it goes on the Havoc Demon Hunter, if we have offensive CDs up, we're not going to press anything because like the Mage is still in his Combustion right here. So it goes on Insia. So Hearthjax is effectively going to solo this one that's on Insia while everybody else is helping. Alternatively, you could bop it or trinket it or whatever, right? Every minute, something like that. Now, since we're in our offensive CDs, that's being called to make sure that we don't overcommit stuff. We might end up PSing or like sacking because we know that Insia is going to be in it for a little bit. But the most important thing is that like groups with an Augavoker are very scared whenever the non-Augavoker gets picked because Augavoker is basically buffing up the two DPS. They have Prescience up on those two DPS players 100% uptime. They have Ebon Might, about 70% uptime. And so whenever the Augavoker is getting picked, they're still contributing some damage back to their Thorn, but whenever a DPS gets picked, effectively half of your DPS of the group is gone because the Augavoker by themselves is not going to be doing DPS to the Soul Thorns. And that's actually a very scary sight whenever you have like the Havoc. I think the Havoc Demon Hunter is by far the scariest player to get selected a bunch here. Best target is Mage, worst target by far is Havoc Demon Hunter in this spot. And so they're going to kind of rotate through their defensive usage and stuff like that. Now, there's a question that I get asked a lot. When are you supposed to clear the stacks on the boss? So the boss, whenever it melees, whenever it's just like in this phase, it starts stacking up this the damage buff that you see right here, and it melees and does more damage to the tank. And you can clear that by dragging the boss into fire. And there's a question of like, when are you supposed to clear how many stacks, I think is the common question. The answer isn't relative to the stack count on the boss. The answer is relative to when soul thorns are going out and when the tank needs a clear, right? So and this happens typically you'll either do on second or third soul thorns are the two most common times. After the second or after the third soul thorns, your tank will be looking to clear depending on what tank you're playing with and depending on what key level it is on Tyrant. On Fortified, it varies a little bit, but on Tyrant, what I've seen is like between 2 and 3 soul thorns is average of what you're going to see out of your tanks being able to survive. And then after that second or that third soul thorns is cleared off, your tank will then drag the mob into the fire. The best thing you can do as a DPS, and particularly if you're like a ranged DPS, is you can watch the fire, and whenever you see your tank angling to start clearing, you can spam ping on top of the fire and tell them which fire to go to. Because the fire isn't very clear as to what's fresh fire and what's old fire. And so if you're paying attention for your tank to let them know where they need to be taking the boss, that's going to help a lot. But yeah, that's basically functionally how Soulbound Goliath goes. They do okay. They get decent RNG as to who the stuff's going on. They have to commit a battle res on an evoker at some point. It's not like the end of the world. Their RNG is like fine. It's hard to pre-defensive as well. They have a Blessing of Protection, which is nice. Here are DCs at some point in this run. So I swapped to AJ's POV. By the way, I love AJ's UI. This UI is sick. I don't know how he has this set up. I'm not sure if I don't think this is a default UI, but man, I love this UI. The rest of the key is fairly straightforward. There's not much else that happens in a Waycrest Manor at a high level that doesn't happen in like an average level key. The only thing that I would say that they do that's maybe a bit atypical and you don't see from common groups. Actually, let's talk about a couple of things. First off, you can kick Lady Waycrest if you have long kicks here. So Mage, you see Hearthjacks. From AJ's POV, it's kind of hard to see where he's standing, but he's standing up against this wall, and he's able to counterspell the Racking Chorus cast, and that reduces the amount of damage that's going out onto players, just in general. And so whenever his counterspell is up, he's going to be kicking that. I believe you have to have a 30-yard range kick. So Wind Shear works. Evoker Quell does not. And that kind of sucks, but it's something that's going to save your group damage if you have a ranged DPS, and they are aware of that. Beyond that, fairly standard stuff, all things considered, throughout the rest of this key. Their pathing was pretty good. You can check that on Raider.io if you want to look at the exact route that they ran. The only final thing that they did that was interesting, I think, was taking all of the dog mobs, I don't even know what they're actually called, into Gorak Tul. And so on Tyrannical, this can be a bit dangerous, but like we were talking about earlier, their third lust is on Gorak Tul here, because they lusted on that 20-minute mark that we were talking about. So the first lust was 30 seconds into the key. Their second lust was 10:30. Their third lust was 20:30. And now at 31:30, they're about to have their final lust of the dungeon, where they're taking all of these horrors into Gorak Tul. And some comps and some specializations get better damage returns from this than others. This can be kind of scary. You see Encia actually, I would assume he got melee to death, but he might have been chain leapt on. So they're going to commit an engineering battle res or an intercession. I don't know exactly what they commit on him. He's actually kind of far from the group, which makes this pull even scarier. They eventually get him up, commit the engineering battle res. They pop their lust, and then they have combustion. They have combustion in a meta, and Fire Mage is able to do great priority damage while AoEing down these horrors. The Havoc Demon Hunter their single target rotation is their AoE rotation. And so these mobs are going to get pretty much evaporated. On Tyrannical, as long as you're getting CC on these slavers that you see right here with this Deathlands cast, it doesn't matter that you have the horrors pulled into the boss, assuming you can get them killed off before the first AoE. And even if you can't necessarily get them killed off before the first AoE, if you drop like a barrier or pop like a major defensive, it's probably still okay. But yeah, that's basically all this group has done. This is an absolutely excellent run, and this is a group that's been playing a lot lately, so I would recommend going and checking out their Twitch pages. I'll link them down in the description as well, so you can go and look at them, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.